Good evening. It's a tremendous pleasure to be here, to see all of you here, to see members of the Jewish Renewal community here. I'm very grateful to the Jewish Studies program, to Marty Jaffe, who issued the invitation to me, and to Mrs. Althea Strum for the wonderful opportunity to be back here at the University of Washington. I wanted to begin by telling you a little bit about how I got into this project. Several years ago, I wrote a book about the Yiddish prayers and devotional lives of 17th and 18th century Central and Eastern European Jewish women. As part of my overall investigation into the nature of Jewish women's spirituality at that time and place, one question in particular interested me. The 17th and 18th centuries were a period when the Kabbalah, the Jewish mystical tradition, which arose in the early Middle Ages, flourished, developed, and spread. And Hasidism, the religious revival movement, captured the hearts of Jewish men across Eastern Europe. I say men advisedly. Thus, perhaps for the first time in Jewish history, a mystical approach to the religious life became central and vital for the large mass of Jewish people. But did the large mass of Jewish people include women? To what extent did women have access to Kabbalistic knowledge? And if they did, how did they use that knowledge? In the course of trying to answer those questions, I discovered a whole literature in Yiddish that popularized Kabbalistic ideas to non-learned Jews, some of it intended for a male and some of it intended for a female audience. Even if they did not fully grasp the insights of the mystical tradition in all their depth and complexity, many Jews, women and men, began to understand their religious practice and hopes for redemption in terms deriving from Jewish mysticism. Influenced by the waves of new mystically inspired rituals and books emanating from the spiritual revival in Safed and Tzfat, they conceived of the Messianic redemption as a healing of the separation between the Holy One, blessed be He, the Kadosh Baruch Hu, approximately the equivalent of the God of Rabbinic Judaism, and the feminine presence and immanence of God in the world, the Shekhinah, and understood that it was their task to help this tikkun, this repair of the cosmos, through their prayer and performance of the mitzvot, the commandments. If they were Hasidim, in this case men, they strove for devekut, communion or union with God, through prayer, dance, and song. And I'll return to some of these concepts in both my second and my third lectures. Well, I completed that book. I picked up my head and looked around for another research topic. Lo and behold, the popularization of Kabbalah was all around me. Along with Tibetan Buddhism, Taoism, and yoga, all of a sudden, Kabbalah was the darling of celebrities and claimed such followers as Liz Taylor, Madonna, and Leonard Nimoy. Have any of you seen that book of photographs he did on the Shekhinah? Yes, well. There were Kabbalah websites and Kabbalah centers. Courses on Jewish mysticism were offered everywhere from Jewish community centers to Chabad houses. There was even a renewed interest in the Shekhinah, the feminine aspect of God. Well, I hope this won't disappoint you, but I decided I was not really interested in celebrities. I wanted to understand the appeal of Jewish mystical teachings for ordinary Jews today, especially for women. And I wanted to know how Jews today use, adapt, and transform Jewish mysticism. As a folklorist trained in participant observer fieldwork, I looked for a community to study, a community that drew inspiration from Kabbalah as an important Jewish resource, and that sought to make Kabbalah broadly available to anyone who was interested. The so-called Jewish Renewal movement was an ideal site for the examination of the meaning of mysticism for ordinary Jews, since it looks upon the mystical tradition as one of its wellsprings, and further, it regards women and men as equal partners in Jewish life. Thus, just as I had looked at mysticism for ordinary Jews, especially women, in the 18th century, I could investigate similar questions in the 21st century through the Jewish Renewal movement. And this movement was particularly interesting to me because, as Professor Jaffe mentioned, some 20-odd years ago, I had studied the Chavurah movement, another alternative form of American Judaism, with which Jewish Renewal has had close ties and some crossover members. Okay, I've been using this term Jewish Renewal. What do I mean by it? While many aspects of American Judaism might be characterized as renewal in some form, my study is more narrowly focused and confined to organizations and people closely associated with Aleph, the Alliance for Jewish Renewal. This network of groups is rooted in a kind of neo-Hasidism, about which I'll have more to say in my third lecture, as well as the counterculture of the 60s, the ecological and feminist movements, and Eastern influences. I'm quoting from one of their documents. Like the Chavurah movement, another founding influence, Jewish Renewal is one of several alternative forms of Judaism that have flourished over the last 30 years or so, both in North America and also in Europe, South America, and Israel. Two rabbis, both originally part of Lubavitch Hasidism, can be regarded as the founders of Jewish Renewal, and in different ways. Zalman Schachter Shalomi and the late Shlomo Carlebach, whose music I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Schachter Shalomi founded the B'nai or Sons of Light religious fellowship, a precursor of Aleph, in 1962, and incorporated it in 1978. Around 1980, the name was changed to Pnei Or, Faces of Light, rather than Sons of Light, to avoid the apparent sexism of the earlier title. It was actually never officially changed, but a number of renewal communities began to switch the nomenclature. Aleph, the umbrella organization for the movement, was founded in 1993 from an amalgamation of Pnei Or and the Shalom Center, founded by Arthur Waskow in 1982. Aleph's website describes Jewish Renewal as a worldwide trans-denominational movement grounded in Judaism's prophetic and mystical traditions. Note the term trans-denominational. Jewish Renewal does not aspire to be a new denomination added to the established four: Reform, Reconstructionist, Conservative, and Orthodox, but to spread spirituality to all of them. A quick definition of spirituality for those of you who may be uncertain about what it means. I'm defining it as the quest for an experiential relationship with the sacred. Okay? Now, back to the non-denominational aspect of it. Sometimes members refer to Jewish Renewal as the R&D, that is, the research and development arm of contemporary Judaism. And in fact, there are rabbis associated with Jewish Renewal who have been ordained in each of the four movements. Nonetheless, from a sociological point of view, Renewal looks a lot like a denomination, especially on the West Coast. The network of Jewish Renewal communities affiliated with Aleph has about 50 North American congregations and about 10 elsewhere in the world. According to their statement of principles, we are primarily spiritual communities whose roots are in Torah, Kabbalah, and other traditional Jewish sources. We draw deeply as well on our inner truths, our communal wisdom, and on other spiritual traditions as part of the ongoing process of living Torah. Also affiliated with Aleph are a rabbinical ordination program and a rabbinical association, a training program in spiritual direction, the Jewish Renewal Life Center and the Shalom Center in Philadelphia, and a biennial week-long gathering called the Kala, and some other organizations as well. No longer formally affiliated, but still closely allied, is Eilat Chaim, a Jewish spiritual retreat center in the Catskill Mountains of New York. Eilat Chaim, founded over a decade ago, has a full program of week-long retreats over the summer, plus shorter gatherings for study, holiday celebration, and meditation training during the year. Teachers and leaders identified with Jewish Renewal from all over North America and beyond offer courses and lead services and workshops there, and Renewal shapes the overall experience. Similarly, participants come from all over the continent. Thus, Eilat Chaim is one of the best places to meet a good cross-section of Renewal Jews and to experience Renewal in its fullest form. The other really good place to do this is at the Kala, the biennial gathering, which is going to meet this summer in Bellingham, Washington. So at this point, we have a thumbnail organizational and historical sketch of the Jewish Renewal movement. Okay, so now for the slides. It was a Sunday in August last year, and it was just the end of a week-long retreat at Eilat Chaim, the aforementioned retreat center. We had spent, about 70 of us had spent a week davening together, studying together, socializing, singing, dancing, eating together, very important, and socializing over food. We had been studying Hasidic texts about repentance. This is with Elliot Ginsberg, who was the teacher of that course. We'd been some courses had been on Jewish meditation walks in nature. And some courses were on Jewish texts for healing and renewal. There's also a course on drumming and davening, but I didn't manage to get a picture of that one. Every morning, for those who wanted, this is obviously was the beginning of Elul. People were blowing the shofar. There were meditation or services if people wanted. Later in the day, you could go to a Torah yoga class. And so there were a variety of activities there at Eilat Chaim. There we all were on the last day, trying to buy a piece of the experience to take home. So what did I see when I entered the bookstore? Well, on my left, there was a rack of clothes, soft, gauzy gowns in a variety of colors for both women and men. There were talitot, prayer shawls, in rainbow colors. There were T-shirts for sale along the back wall that dealt with everything from the four worlds, a Kabbalistic concept, about which I'll speak later in my lectures, and to the four matriarchs. Here is a T-shirt. We shall call them forth, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. There were kippot and baseball caps. See the olive? Finally, there was a small rack of earrings and necklaces, often in the shape of Kabbalistic amulets. But there was a lot for sale besides clothing and adornment. Also available were what one might call aids to renewal-style prayer. Meditation cushions embroidered with Kabbalistic motifs, we'll see those in a minute, and percussion instruments, from hand-painted tambourines to modest rattles. This has the Eilat Chaim logo on it. A few ritual objects, mezuzot, kiddush cups, challah covers. You can see some of the ritual candlesticks and the menorah here, as well as art prints with spiritual themes. And there was a small selection of eco-kosher food and toiletries. And all of that is before we even get to the books, the CDs, the tapes, the videos. The musical offerings, which we're looking at over here, include tapes and CDs by renewal liturgists and composers. There were also tapes of classical and new cantorial music, CDs of Shlomo Carlebach, and a variety of Hasidic, Sephardic, klezmer, and neo-klezmer and Jewish New Wave recordings. In addition to the music were audio cassettes of teachings by many popular renewal leaders and videos of founder Zalman Schachter Shalomi. Books included prayer books, both traditional and new, Hasidic and Kabbalistic texts and translation, popularized teaching and scholarly books about Jewish meditation, mysticism, and history, as well as feminist interpretations of Judaism and anthologies by gay and lesbian Jews. There was also a full range of self-help books, guides for the intermarried, works on Jewish parenting, and workbooks for dealing with trauma, pain, and mourning. There was some Jewish fiction and poetry, and a few books for children and teenagers. Around the gift shop, some people were leafing through books on Hasidism or listening to sample CDs of klezmer music. Others were trying on embroidered kippot. And finally, there was a long line of happy people at the cash register, all of us with our arms full of goods. And here you can see also, on top here, you can see the meditation cushions, you can see the tambourines. You can see over here, this woman is trying on a talit. You can see both the fact that it has a price tag on it and tzitzit or fringes. And the talitot here, the robes, the multicolored robes there. Okay, so here's one question. What was I doing in that gift shop? Let me give you some idea about the way an ethnographer of religion works. My two primary research tools have been participant observation fieldwork and interviews, and I use snowballing to find, for those sociology buffs, to find interviewees. These have been supplemented by books, audio, and videotapes produced by members of the movement, as well, of course, as my scholarly reading. Participant observation means just what it says. I attend a retreat or a service or a meeting where I both participate and observe. So in the gift shop, guess what I was doing? I was shopping, as were the others there. But I was also taking pictures, which you saw, and taking notes. I once spent actually 2 hours in that gift shop carefully writing down what was there, and that took me 2 hours, and that did not include individual book titles, although it did include kinds of books. When I enter a new fieldwork site, and often before I come, I try to let people know as soon as possible that I'm engaged in a study of renewal rather than simply intending as a participant. Most often, they greet me with enthusiasm, volunteering for interviews, inviting me for Shabbat meals, and telling me about their renewal communities. Since the middle of 1999, I've conducted fieldwork at various Jewish renewal events, about 10 retreats at Eilat Chaim in the Catskills and 5 at the Jewish Renewal Life Center in Philadelphia, and numerous Sabbath and holiday services at Pnei Or congregation in Philadelphia. More recently, actually just this spring, I visited renewal communities in Los Angeles and the San Francisco Bay Area, attending 5 different services, a Rosh Chodesh celebration, a community meeting, and Hebrew school. I've conducted interviews in these various locations with about 30 people, of whom about a third were rabbis or other leaders. Most of them indicated that they would prefer to be quoted by name, and in those cases I have done so. Otherwise, I quote my interviewees anonymously. As a folklorist, I'm interested in the religious lives of ordinary Jews, in this case active participants in renewal communities, as much as or more than rabbis or teachers. My research task, most basically, is to understand renewal and make it intelligible to others, rather than either to promote it or critique it. Okay, but here's a more important question than what I was doing in the bookstore. What can we learn about Jewish renewal, and more broadly about its place in American Judaism and the American religious scene from the gift shop at Eilat Chaim? If one is shopping for Judaism, what can be found here and not elsewhere? While some of the items the store contains could be found in any synagogue gift shop, the emphasis on certain kinds of books, music, and tchotchkes, if we can use that technical term, is telling. Renewal is clearly the spiritual version of American Judaism, as the books on Kabbalah, music for meditation, and note cards with mystical motifs bear witness. Thus, most basically, we learn that there is a market not being met elsewhere, for a certain type of Judaism, one that emphasizes, if you think about what the books were about, spiritual quest and therapeutic insight. Renewal Jews would say that this is precisely what is missing from mainstream American Judaism. More mainstream Jews might find renewal's emphasis on an experience of God's presence and willingness to incorporate, say, Buddhist meditation techniques to reach that goal, odd or even un-Jewish. To further illustrate renewal's self-understanding and some of the tensions with other varieties of American Judaism, I want to give you an extended quote from the writings of one renewal Jew named Arlene Goldbard, some of you may know her, who lived for many years until quite recently when she and her husband moved to California right here in Seattle. Thus, we'll be able to hear in first person how a member of Renewal sees her own movement and its sometimes tense relations with other varieties of American Judaism. Goldbard, who is vice president of the board of Aleph, the Alliance for Jewish Renewal, wrote a piece entitled Fringe People, a midrash on the Book of Ruth set in present-day Seattle, and I quote it by her permission. First of all, you remember the story of the Book of Ruth? Okay, most of you seem to remember the story of the Book of Ruth. So the background is that Ruth, of the way the Midrash is set up, the background is that Ruth and Naomi are renewal Jews, just returned to Seattle, clearly the Holy Land, from a difficult sojourn in exile in Chicago. While Boaz is a staid old conservative Jew who has lived all his life in one place right here. Boaz, Naomi's relative, as in the Book of Ruth, has given Ruth a job at his firm, and their relationship is developing. As Ruth is expressing her frustration to Naomi that she has to explain everything about renewal, such as eco-kashrut to Boaz, who just doesn't seem to get it, Naomi interrupts her. We're fringe people. Fringe, you know, out there on the edge, exploring the frontier, innovating at the periphery, pushing the envelope. Fringe. We are to the Jewish people, my dear daughter, as the tzitzit, the ritual fringes, are to our garments, a reminder of holiness, a reminder of the divine spirit. Except the other thing about fringes is that they're messy and they get tangled. Jewish renewal includes too many conflicting tendencies for people who want to avoid tangles. We've got the politicos, for whom every text is an incitement to revolution. We've got the meditation folks, whose mission impossible is to get Jews to quiet down. We've got the ecstatics, who want to help us fly. At every Kala, there's a line of bearded frummies outside the tent shuckling over their little art scrolls. And across the way, a very mixed minyan is doing yoga versions of the Hebrew letters. And you know what, Shana Meidela? I love each and every one of them because no one has any other motive than to get close to God. Goldbard accurately describes the major groupings among renewal Jews, political, contemplative, and ecstatic, as well as the messiness and lack of consistency of the movement. More important, she catches the sense that renewal Jews have, that their form of Judaism is both experimental and holy. And while her character, Naomi, romanticizes the motivations of renewal Jews, I mean, people go to the Kala for all kinds of reasons, like to meet somebody or, you know, not only to get close to God. Nonetheless, getting close to other people too, but anyway, nonetheless, getting close to God is absolutely central to renewal's self-understanding. So, what is renewal in a more extended sense? With our trip to the bookstore at Eilat Chaim and Goldbard's description under our belts, we can now ask in a more systematic way, what distinguishes Jewish renewal among the varieties of American Judaism? It finds its place among the liberal and alternative forms of Judaism, especially the Chavurah movement and Reconstructionism, both of which are closely connected. And in addition, as I'll discuss more fully in my third lecture, renewal has roots in Hasidism. Let me list and discuss the important characteristics of renewal with some reference to the other movements. Some of these points, although not all of them, will be expanded in my second and third lectures. And there are 7 characteristics in all. First, the defining feature of Jewish renewal among the spectrum of available varieties of Judaism. At the core of renewal is a quest for the experience of the divine presence, for an experiential relationship with God. I cannot overemphasize the importance of this characteristic. This is the only form of contemporary American Judaism to the left of Hasidism and perhaps certain other Orthodox groups for which this is the case. As a woman in her 50s writes about how she lives as a renewal Jew, Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha, I serve God with joy, with my spirit, mind, heart, and body in the 4 worlds, which is a Kabbalistic concept I'll talk about more in my third lecture. But anyway, she says, in the 4 worlds, I live the principles of Kabbalistic-based renewal, a joyous neo-Hasidic Judaism filled with Torah, daily davening, and spiritual rituals. God is central to this woman. Renewal Jews seek this experience of the divine chiefly through 2 time-honored paths found among mystics of all traditions, contemplative meditation and ecstatic worship. With regard to the first, Eilat Chaim offers several meditation training retreats a year, some specifically intended for Jewish professionals. This is the idea of trying to bring spirituality to a wider Jewish world. And many renewal Jews have incorporated meditation into their daily practice. And with regard to ecstasy, let me quote Marcy Braverman, a woman in her early 30s who is getting her PhD in religion, actually in Hinduism, at a California university. She describes the intense experience she had while attending the Kala, the biennial national gathering, a few years ago for the first time. The feeling that I had to describe my experience at the Kala was that I was falling in love. But to my amazement, it had nothing to do with a guy. It was Judaism. I'm getting chills just thinking about it. I could do all this religious chanting, she had learned about it in Hinduism, in my own tradition. I didn't know that Judaism, in contrast to Hinduism, could be expressed or practiced that way. It was a total awakening. I was getting this PhD, and I always thought that I was totally intellectual. But I loved the singing and dancing, the feeling of God coursing through the veins, the unconditional joy that can just bubble up from singing and dancing. I just wanted that. Part of this woman's excitement is the experience of the powerful presence of God coursing through the veins. Another piece of the experience for her, and this is significant for many people in Renewal, is finding intense spirituality within Judaism, while before she had only found it in Hinduism. Second, so that was all my first point. Second, Renewal shares with other liberal movements in Judaism a commitment to gender equality and to feminism of certain varieties, including, in the case of Renewal and Reconstructionism, the use of gender-neutral and feminine images of God. Each liberal movement approaches these questions differently, and there's a tension between different approaches within Renewal itself. Nonetheless, as one woman told me, it was so important to be able to worship a God who isn't the Lord. In addition, Renewal shares with the Chavurah movement and Reconstructionism, and to some extent Reform, and openness to gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgendered people. The energy and creativity of women, whether straight or queer, have been enormously influential in shaping Renewal Judaism. The gender issues and feminist quality of Renewal form the subject of my second lecture. Third, Renewal looks upon Jewish tradition, texts, customs, practices, as a flexible resource. In this, it is similar to both the Reform movement and to Reconstructionism, and could take for its own Reconstructionism's motto, tradition has a vote, but not a veto. Like Reform and Reconstructionism, Jewish Renewal creates new liturgy and ritual. Although the question of authenticity is often raised with regard to Renewal's ritual creativity, it is worthwhile to remember that Reform Judaism has been involved in just this process for close to 2 centuries by now. However, Renewal is distinctive in the aspects of Jewish tradition it favors, and especially Hasidic and mystical texts. That is, Renewal looks to Jewish tradition for what one could call mythological resources, ways of reimagining the sacred, the cosmos, and humanity, and reawakening a sense of wonder and awe. I'll explore aspects of this issue in my third lecture. Renewal also takes a distinctive approach to the study of texts. A Jewish Renewal teacher who came one summer to the Chavurah Institute, which is it's a week-long study session for Chavurah Jews, he contrasted Chavurah and Renewal approaches to study. The Chavurah Institute seems so unspiritual to me, he said. You ask a Chavurah Jew, they won't say that. Here, he said, you go to a class, you open the text, you study it, and at the end of the class, it's over, fartik. When I teach a text, that is in the Jewish Renewal approach, first, we sit and sing a niggun, a wordless melody. Then we meditate quietly for a few minutes to open our hearts to the text. Then we study. Then we process what happened. Then we sit quietly again, and we sing a niggun to close. Okay, fourth point. Fourth, Renewal is open to the spiritual resources of other traditions. Here, Renewal is distinctive, at least in the explicitness of its hybridity. For while classical Reform Judaism incorporated the ideas of the European Enlightenment, and the Chavurah movement, the ethos of the 60s and the counterculture, Renewal alone does not fudge its interest in, its borrowings from Buddhist meditation, Native American shamanism, and Christian spiritual direction. As Zalman Schachter Shalomi put it, many of us who seek God today look for some needed spiritual vitamins in the liturgical and theological medicine chests of others. This is one of the areas of tension with other more mainstream varieties of American Judaism. Fifth is the importance of charismatic leadership in Renewal. This is one of the places where Renewal shows its Hasidic roots most clearly. Unlike the situation in Reconstructionist congregations, the rabbi is not regarded simply as a resource for the community, someone who educates and empowers, but rather as one who inspires, who is a vehicle for closeness to God. The contrast here is sharpest with the Chavurah movement, which eschews professional rabbis altogether. This doesn't mean there are no charismatic leaders in the Chavurah movement, only that there's no conceptual place for them. Once again, my interview with the Renewal teacher quoted above is telling. He said, I don't understand how the Chavurah movement does it without charismatic leadership. Our aim is ecstasy. Sixth, Renewal partakes of the emphasis on self-realization and self-development, the therapeutic culture that is so widespread today. To quote a man in his 40s who moved to the San Francisco East Bay area several years ago, specifically because, as he put it, it's the Jewish renewal center of the earth. This is what he said. And he said lots of other things, but the little quote is, "The music and the chanting lit a place in me I didn't know existed." This brief remark highlights the centrality of the self and coming to know its depths for Renewal Jews. Indeed, the self/soul and spirituality are deeply intertwined in Renewal. For some, spirituality is psychologized. For others, psychology in the form of transpersonal psychology is spiritualized. For example, a series of 3 retreats sponsored by the Jewish Renewal Life Center, which I attended a few years ago, was entitled Soul Work, explicitly bringing together the spiritual and the psychological. And to quote the Aleph website, Jewish Renewal seeks to bring creativity, relevance, joy, and an all-embracing awareness to spiritual practice as a path to healing our hearts and finding balance and wholeness, tikkun halev, or repair of the heart. Finally, 7th, is the commitment to social justice and a left-liberal political stance. According to the Aleph website, Jewish Renewal helps to heal the world by promoting justice, freedom, responsibility, caring for all life and the earth that sustains all life, tikkun olam, repair of the world. While political action in such areas as ecology, advocacy for the poor and homeless, and promoting peace is of great significance for many Renewal Jews, it has not been the focus of my research. Okay, so now let me broaden the discussion to briefly consider renewal in the framework of American religion more generally. To sum up some of the points I've made, renewal seeks resources that can assist in the spiritual quests of its members. These can be found in classical Jewish texts, whether biblical, rabbinic, mystical, or Hasidic, in American therapeutic culture, and in a variety of other religious traditions. Further, renewal is in part built upon the spiritual imagination and energy of women. Finally, renewal is characterized by ritual creativity and a certain hybridity, both in ways of thinking and in ways of doing. One young woman I interviewed, she's a Jewish community activist who grew up as in a renewal household. She told me, "When I think about God, I'm a Reconstructionist. When I daven, when I worship, I'm renewal. And then there's that little bit of Buddhism." All of these characteristics set Jewish renewal squarely within the American religious scene today. Sociologists of religion, such as Robert Wuthnow of Princeton and Wade Clark Roof of the University of California at Santa Barbara, have studied contemporary American religious life. Both of them point to the ways in which religious life has changed in America over the last half-century, and to the dramatically increasing interest in spirituality. As Wuthnow writes, "At its core, spirituality consists of all the beliefs and activities by which individuals attempt to relate their lives to God, or to a divine being, or some other conception of transcendent reality. But spirituality is not just the creation of individuals. It is shaped by larger social circumstances and by the beliefs and values present in the wider culture. Thus," this is basically Wuthnow's argument, that's the end of the quote, "At one time, most Americans lived in stable communities, and reaching maturity, including religious maturity, meant growing into roles that were already known, becoming a mother, a father, a citizen, a member of Wednesday night ladies' Bible study or the church choir. Now, as a result of the social upheaval of the 1960s, the feminist revolution, the greater mobility and individualism of our culture, more of us are forced to seek our own way, to define for ourselves what it means to be a mother or father, a citizen, a member of a religious community. So, Wuthnow argues, we have moved from what he calls a spirituality of dwelling to a spirituality of seeking. We've become a nation of spiritual seekers." Wade Clark Roof takes the argument a step further, suggesting that not only do we live in what he calls a quest culture, but we find ourselves in a spiritual marketplace. There are two aspects to this marketplace. The first is the wonderful array of religious and spiritual traditions spread out before us. The classics of Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, Eastern Orthodox Christianity, and Jewish mysticism are translated and available in accessible editions. There are books and practitioners around available to enlighten us about Native American shamanism and African divinities. Second, the second aspect of this is that so much of it is for sale. Note the very fact that Eilat Chaim has a gift shop, something that at first blush does not seem necessary to its mission as a spiritual retreat center. However, this should not surprise us. Not only synagogues, but other retreat centers and even some monasteries have gift shops. The gift shop is Renewal's spiritual marketplace in miniature. The range of goods enables us to sense what Renewal is about. We live in a commodity culture, and consumption is our main means of self-expression. Nonetheless, it may give us pause. What is the nature of the spiritual quest in a consumer society? The decline of social cohesion and religious coherence means that each individual has to work harder, with more initiative, less structure, and an enormously expanded range of resources to cobble together a sense of meaning of life. We tend to do that in the same way that we go about other tasks. We search for the consumer goods that satisfy our needs. We shop for a congenial synagogue, for a good therapist, for an enlightening self-help book, for an inspiring adult education class. And while some may find their sense of meaning in career, marriage, therapy, and or a membership in a conservative synagogue or Reformed temple, others seek spirituality, a personal relationship to the sacred. The sociologist Peter Berger once defined modernity as the multiplication of choices. Now, paradoxically, because religious life is not a given, because the range of possibilities is greater, the process is more conscious, stimulating greater attention to spiritual issues. This is, I think, one of the ways that Renewal really is on the cutting edge of American Judaism. More than other kinds of Judaism, Renewal really is conscious of the necessity for drawing on a variety of materials for creating a spiritual life. I'll return to some of these themes in my third lecture. To sum up for this evening, after taking you on a visit to Eilat Chaim's bookstore, I have outlined the 7 major characteristics of Jewish renewal. The centrality of the quest, this will be on the exam, the centrality of the quest for God, the importance of women and feminism, the use of Jewish tradition, especially the mystical tradition, as a flexible resource, the interest in other religious traditions, the importance of charismatic leadership, the influence of therapeutic culture, and the commitment to social justice. And I've noted some areas of similarity and tension with other branches of American Judaism. Finally, I've begun to set Renewal in the larger framework of American religious life in the 21st century. The astute listener may have noticed that, although I have outlined the nature of the Jewish renewal movement, I haven't said much about who renewal Jews are, who joins the movement, and why. I'll take that up at the beginning of my second lecture. Just to give you a little hint about one thing I'm going to say, the majority of members are women. I'll explore the reasons for that and the ways in which feminism and women have shaped the movement. This will give us a fresh look from a different point of view at some of the issues raised this evening: the relationship of renewal Jews to the divine, the use and adaptation of certain Kabbalistic concepts, and the meaning of renewal's distinctive ritual creativity. Thank you. I'm looking forward to lots of questions.
My question is, would the Jewish renewal movement consider a lifelong attempt to be just and in control of your impulses, such as greed and coveting, be considered an experiential relationship to the sacred?
It's a good question. And I think it brings, I think that Jewish renewal thinks that those qualities are very important, being just, controlling one's impulses. However, they do not constitute what Jewish renewal would call an experiential relationship to the sacred. They do constitute another way of living a holy life. Yes?
That meal that you had a photograph of, was that vegetarian?
Yes. Yes. Actually, I have more to say in answer to that. I was hoping somebody would ask me about the food. I actually intend at some point to write a paper about food at retreats. Let me just say one short thing about this, and that is, in the course of doing this research, I didn't only attend Jewish Renewal retreats. I also attended, I went to a Christian retreat center for comparison, a Presbyterian center in the Poconos, and I was so struck by the difference between the food at the two places. At Kirkridge, the name of this center, at Eilat Chaim, as you could see, there was plenty of food. It is delicious, it's vegetarian, it's strictly kosher, and if you so desire, you could eat yourself sick, and I have. At Kirkridge, the meal was spare. There was always a vegetarian alternative, but it was, say, veggie meatballs, a salad, packaged frozen green beans, some white rolls, and packaged cookies for dessert. And the one time I took seconds, it was noticed. Very politely. So, I mean, I think there's an article there, I do.
In Seattle, there was a wide co-op movement in terms of food, and then we found the elements of food co-op in terms of natural, organic food, local farmers, all the best aspects of getting back to eating. And I wonder, I heard from once, I was taken with a Renewal religious leader who said, if the Renewal movement does its job, many Renewal congregations will have found themselves in, for example, in Reform congregations and in Orthodox and Conservatives where they fit, to the extent that they fit, and then they will have better done their job if they bring back the best of them.
Yes, I see what you mean.
It's like organic food at the QFC.
Yes, so you're making an analogy between the organic food movement and Renewal. Yes, that is the philosophy of many Renewal people. However, I will say that, again, especially in certain areas, San Francisco Bay Area is the most outstanding area of this, that there are as many Renewal congregations in San Francisco Bay Area as there are conservative congregations. So that it begins in a place like that to look like a denomination rather than necessarily outreach to other kinds.
You mentioned that this movement has its own seminaries, and I'm curious a little bit about where the seminaries are and how do they train these charismatic leaders?
Okay, good question. This is a seminary without walls. It has a rabbinical program. It doesn't have a rabbinical campus. There are, students can take courses partly at, I know some of them take them at other seminaries or at other institutions of higher Jewish learning, and they also they have actual training in charismatic leadership. They also are required to come to Eilat Chaim for rabbinical training periodically in the course of their rabbinical program and to meet in various other places. I believe it's Marcia Prager, who's a rabbi in Philadelphia, who's the supervisor. She's one of the supervisors of the rabbinical program. Anybody else? Yes.
Yeah, I apologize for not having time to articulate my question a little bit better. But I was kind of wondering, the leaders among the Renewal movement, I understand they're trying to get closer to God through the meditation, through the yoga, through the nature walks. Do they have a limit? Have they decided on where the movement is going to stop in terms of steps they're willing to take to get closer to God?
Well, it's a good question, and I can think of several directions where they might stop. One of them is that the people who are in Renewal wish to be Jews. That is, most of them are Jews, well, the majority of them are Jews by birth. Others of them are Jews by choice. But they are not, for example, Jubus, that is, people who leave Judaism for Buddhism. or for other spiritual traditions. They may learn from those traditions, but they are some people who find that, for example, observing Shabbat, the Jewish Sabbath, the holidays, some form of the Jewish dietary laws, forms a basis for their lives, so that on the one hand, they're not interested in leaving Judaism altogether. So that's one boundary. Another boundary is that there are probably certain kinds of ritual practices that you might find in other traditions that they would not adopt. For example, we heard about the Shiite pilgrimage to Karbala recently in the news, where there's a fair amount, and this, you had this in the Christian Middle Ages as well, self-flagellation, people cutting themselves. That's not their path. Now, if you mean how close can they get to God, was that your question?
No, I wasn't really trying to say how close they could get to God, but just in terms of, I understand that they're trying to get closer to God, but it seems some of their activities from the conservative movement may sort of be considered un-Jewish. That you don't get closer to God by singing together, you get closer to God by reading the Torah. And
yeah, good question.
among the conservative movement, many people think that. So
No,
I'm
good
just
question.
Yeah,
Good
I'm just
question.
wondering if the Renewal movement have said, as of the 613 commandments of which we can follow, we're going to follow these, or etc.
Well, okay, no, they don't say it like that. I mean, I would say that in most conservative congregations, at least again in the East Coast, and I haven't been out here on the West Coast to study them, getting closer to God isn't necessarily what people are about. That is, they're interested in being good Jews. They might be interested in obeying the mitzvot. They might be interested in perpetuating Jewish history and culture. They might be interested in living lives that are informed by Torah. But probably, I mean, I very rarely find conservative Jews who will talk about God in a spontaneous fashion. So that I think that's one of the differences between the movements.
This is almost a follow-up, but to what extent has Renewal attempted to develop its own liturgy? And to what extent has that, if any, if they have, has that caused like conflict with the trans-denominational nature of the movement itself?
Well, and that's also a good question, and I'll talk more about Renewal's liturgy in my next lecture, and in the third lecture. But let me just say here that, that again, somebody I interviewed talked about how the expectation, she says she's led both Renewal and Reconstructionist services. And she says Reconstructionist services are much easier to lead, she said, because first of all, as she put it, it's 50% mumbling. And the framework is specified. Renewal has an expectation of creativity, and that each service should be different and enlightening each time. Although, again, there are certain frameworks that are used. So, in fact, that makes it quite, in some ways, available for trans-denominationalism. Some people prefer something which is very close to traditional davening. Some people or traditional services. Some people prefer things which are very, very different. I also gave a guest lecture last fall at a Reform congregation where the service could have been in any Renewal congregation. It was just very similar. So, and the rabbi was somebody who'd been very influenced by the quest for spirituality. So there's flexibility there.
I'd like to know, those who are drawn to the Renewal movement, are they the dropouts from other movements, mainstream, or are they the, pardon the expression, unchurched? Those who have not been involved.
It's a good question, and somebody was showing me today statistics saying that in Seattle, 20% of Jewish households, only 20%, are affiliated with synagogues. So the unchurched are the vast majority. Or the unsynagogued. I actually have a colleague, Lynn Davidman, who's at Brown University, who is writing a research paper on doing a book the unsynagogued, as she started to call them, but she decided it was too unelegant, so she's calling them the unaffiliated. I'll talk again, as people keep feeding me lines for my next lectures, but I will talk more about who comes to Renewal next time. But let me say that you've got both kinds. You have people who grew up in Orthodox had an Orthodox education, left it for Renewal. There are people who grew up in conservative reform, whether in an involved way or not a very involved way. And there are people who could not find anything in Judaism. So you've got both kinds, and I don't have statistics. Okay, last question?
All right.
Yes.
To put it fairly crudely,
Yes.
It would seem that conventionally the major denominations have been sort of doctrinally differentiated in terms of halacha. That seems to be the core way of differentiating between what is a conservative versus an Orthodox, or what is a Reform versus a conservative Jew, is an understanding of.
Although I'm not sure it works for Reform and Reconstructionists.
Okay, right. Well, see, and this is my question then, is as we're moving into this more market-driven, I mean, halacha is not a very free market concept. So as we're moving into, into this new space where freedom is constructed in terms of what you choose to consume, would it be fair to say that Renewal does not really have any definitional relationship or position on halacha? Or is there something there?
Yeah, they
It's a
do
little
have
funny.
positions on halacha. They do. But my argument is that, I guess here's the folklorist talking.
Okay.
What people at the Jewish Theological Seminary define as conservative Judaism is not the way most conservative Jews live. Right? It's not the way most conservative Jews understand what Judaism is. So that, as a folklorist, what I'm mainly interested in is the living Judaism of the ordinary people. That's what I've been emphasizing here. So that it's true that, and so I'm not even certain that from, you could say, a folkloristic or a sociological or an anthropological point of view, what distinguishes Reform and Conservative Judaism or Reconstructionist Reform and Conservative Judaism is the attitude towards halacha. It does distinguish what may be taught in the different seminaries. And it may distinguish what certain elites, intellectual elites within the movements, whether lay or rabbinic, think. But it's not necessarily, people may choose a Reform or Conservative congregation not on the basis of its halachic attitudes, but on the basis of where their friends are, or what kind of Hebrew school program it has, or all kinds of things.
Sure. Although you've been talking about the relationship of the, quote, movement, to define it sort of loosely, to its leadership. And so is the leadership of the Renewal movement more relevant to the experience of Jewish renewal than Reconstructionist or conservative leadership is to those? I mean, I'm not sure that that's what you're saying, but it sounds like it.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. That's a good question. And let me also say something about Renewal's attitude toward halacha,
Okay.
Which was your original question.
Well, this is interesting, too.
Yeah, and that is just like Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist congregations, it encourages halachic observance. Most Renewal Jews that I know of do have some form of Shabbat and Kashrut observance. They, however, reinterpret what mitzvah means. That is, instead of translating it as commandment, again, not a very market-friendly way of looking at it, they reinterpret it from an Aramaic root, the root of tzavta, that is, coming together. And actually, you can sort of find some justification for this in Jastro's dictionary, although it's certainly not the literal meaning of it. That is, the mitzvah is something that brings you together. It brings people together, it brings them together with each other, it brings them together with God. And so that they think of mitzvot as a vehicle towards relationship rather than as a divine command. Okay?
Yes, thank you. That's
All right, I think that's it then.